Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Newswire. I'm your host, Munib Hamid, and today we are going to discuss the current situation of Afghanistan. Now, in the last times, we have seen explosions, we have seen rockets, we have seen strikes, we have seen ISIS militants being killed by the US forces, and we have also seen civilians murdered by the US forces as well in Afghanistan. But now the situation in Afghanistan is pretty fragile, and well, we, along with the world, cannot completely understand what is going to happen in the future. Now, to talk about the future of Afghanistan and keeping in mind the current situation, we have with us Farkhanda Naderi, former Member of Parliament from Afghanistan. Welcome, Farkhanda. And we also have Dr. Salma Malik with us. She is professor at the Department and Strategic Studies in Islamabad now. Both of you to the program now. I'm sure you all understand the situation and the importance of Afghanistan in the region now. We have seen strikes yesterday by the US forces at a house, and there are reports about 9 civilian casualties. Now, Salma, I want to talk about the civilian casualties firstly. Who is going to take responsibility for those civilians murdered?
Assalamu alaikum, Munib. Thank you so much for having me in your program. Unfortunately, your answer is no one. Given the fragile situation at the moment, there is no solid government in Afghanistan. Amrullah Saleh, President Ghani is out of the country. Amrullah Saleh is not in Kabul controlling things the way things should be. The Taliban are actually in power, but that's a de facto power. It's not a declared power. The Americans are leaving, the Western powers are leaving, so technically the Afghan nationals, the Afghan people are entirely left to themselves to defend, and this is one of the most unfortunate and dangerous situations one can ever think of right at this moment.
Right, Salma, you said that there isn't any government right now, and we all understand the importance of having a government in Afghanistan at the earliest. What is taking so long to form a government?
Well, you see, there has to be some sort of a consensus amongst the various stakeholders before they go for the inclusive government that is being so much talked about. Plus the fact that even if there is an inclusive government, depending on which stakeholder has more power, and power here is not the popular power or the political power. Power here is also the street, the firepower, more than the street power. And how the elections happen, we have also seen in the past, during the previous elections held in these 20 years, that elections in Afghanistan have been very problematic because there are a lot of political stakeholders with different interests, the way, the prism through which they look at Kabul politics. So it has never been an easy game, even in the best of times. And now in such a turmoil, who is the election commissioner? Who is going to monitor all of these things? If there are any election irregularities, which is a domain that happens under normal circumstances. But these circumstances in Kabul, the images that are being shown on the television and all, these are not normal images. And given the fact that there is no power center in Afghanistan at the moment, and even the Western powers are trying to get, I'm sorry to use this derogatory term, trying to get rid of the Afghan problem. So no one is going to take control, or no one is going to take responsibility. And if this is the situation, it's going to become extremely difficult in elections in a lot of fragile societies, such as the one that is at this moment unfolding in Afghanistan, become one of the biggest moot points and a violent circuit, so to speak.
Right, now we have Farkhanda with us. She's a former parliament member of Afghanistan. Now, Farkhanda, it is obvious you will understand the sentiments of the Afghan people way better than the world. What are the sentiments after the Taliban have taken control?
Well, we all can see, and the whole world can see it, that Afghan people are still in shock. They're still in panic. And we have got so many different scenes in Afghanistan that some of them have been reflected by media, and some of them have been neglected by media. So the most popular one is the evacuation and the airport. that we all can see in what state from the beginning of this collapse of government, it brought to the people's mind up to now. And then we have got internally displaced people on the other side, from one province to another province, and maybe to the closest province, they fled. And of course, from different provinces, they came to Kabul, but not that much attention is given to their needs. They need food, they need shelter, they need healthcare. And on the other hand, that, the collapse of the government actually made all institutions paralyzed, even though some positive messages came with such a kind of disaster that happened. And the positive message was the Taliban asked different people, and they even said that to women, that they can come back to work. But unfortunately, in reality, the institutions are not functioning properly, and that people need to go to purchase their daily needs, such as food and many institutional needs at the same time are not accessible to people. People don't have access to governmental services. And even apart from the airport, what is happening that, it has the international attention. You can also see that even if I exaggerate and say that almost 1 million Afghan can have the possibility to leave the country, almost 29 million can stay, inside Afghanistan. And that there's an equal responsibility towards these people. And these people deserve to know of course, they need to know about the upcoming future, but they don't even know about their present, what will happen to them after 1 hour, after 1 day. So what is really important, that there is a vacuum of power and there is uncertainty in the highest level. And when we talk about insecurity, it's not only the physical insecurity, it's at the same time the psychological insecurity that people are suffering from. And I think at this stage, what not only Afghanistan, but our neighbors, region, and the world need, they have to make sure that I don't know what would be the best term to use. I think the best term would be to get out of this anarchism that is going on in Afghanistan. That there are so many searches in people's houses happening. And then so many people are going and trying to abuse people under the name of Taliban. And then we get at the same time a statement, which is, some of them is really good for people to hear, that Taliban says that they are abusing their name. But at the same time, the responsibility of ensuring people's safety is on Taliban's responsibility now, because to the provinces that they have influence and they have control, they have to ensure that people are having their safety, not only their physical safety, but also their mental safety, and other individuals or groups are not abusing their names. So this anarchism right now in the country is scaring so many people. But yes, at the same time, another important, topic is the upcoming government, what kind of government it is going to be. And I think if there's going to be any interim government, it has to be a good reflection of diverse Afghan community, to take people out of panic, that they can see themselves to be reflected in that interim government, in order that they can have hope for inclusive government, which is going to be, in the next stage. So, the positive sides would be the media. Still, we have media in Afghanistan. Still, we have the popular media, at least, because some of the media in the provinces, they severely suffered. But we still have Tulu, one of the popular, channel in Afghanistan. We have Channel One, we have Oriana. So we have different other, media outlets that are still functional, and they still can do their job and reflect different parts of Afghanistan that they are able to reflect. So these are the positive side, and we want to see more of that, because I think even what the media does so far, they are sort of providing directly or indirectly security for Afghanistan as well as for the people who are being in control. The media is really helping out to show to people that, okay, Afghan people can be themselves. They still can be in control of their life, regardless of the fact that they are uncertain what will happen, in the next hour or in the next day. But I think the positive sides that we have to encourage to ensure that, it can maintain and it can be safeguarded, and the journalists are going to be saved. I have to make sure that I'm not going to generalize things. There are a group of journalists who don't want to be in a country any longer, and they want to leave. And I think they have the right, and it's their basic human rights, to go and become refugee wherever they want to be. But for those journalists who are inside the country and they want to serve the nation inside the country, then their safety must be a priority for everyone in the community, especially for Taliban who are in control of Kabul. So I think what is really important for all of us, with such a not high degree of uncertainties, but crisis that we are facing, that we shocked the whole world. So you can imagine what kind of shock and trauma Afghan people went through that. But having said that, we need our Afghans, whether they are politicians or they work in the civil society, in the media, in different parts, whether they're inside the country or they're outside the country, we have to really act wisely. We have to really ensure that any peace processes that we used as a word, and our Afghan people, they were dedicated for the peace process, and they wanted the peace to be a sustainable, inclusive peace for the nation of Afghanistan. We must prioritize that, and we have to go beyond our shock, beyond our feeling frustrations, and take responsibility for our people. And the same thing is true for our neighbors and in the region, because our neighbors are, they are like next to us. It is like a family. A family that even if they are in conflict, at the end of the day, they are so much related to each other emotionally, as well as, blood-wise. Blood-wise, when I say blood-wise, that goes back to this geographical attachment, and so many other, relation that keeps you together. So today, Afghans and our neighbors should know one thing, that even our 20 years partners, they could leave the country, even though I hope that they can define the partnership in other forms, because today we live in a globalized world and every country around the world must be connected to each other. So there has to be another definition for these partners with Afghanistan. But they could even leave, within, after 20 years, even within 2 weeks. But our neighbors are with us and we are with them. And if we have failed within the course of 20 years, being so much filled in with our objective as well as subjectivity in our mind and our personal, experiences or our own perspectives, this is the time that we have to go beyond that. We need to really understand that it is for the interests of Afghanistan as well as our neighbors that we have to ensure that Afghanistan is not going to go through further crisis, and we are not going to have civil war in the country, because the disaster will not limit itself to Afghanistan, it goes to the neighbors. So we know how close we are and how important we have to be to each other. So we have to work now. It's still not late, even though we lost so many opportunities. We could have better politics and policies to ensure that we would not come where we are today. But I think it's still not late, and we have to work on that. And the same thing is for the region. The region has to get responsible. They have to ensure that, everything is not on West, because that the next problem would come to you before it going to the West. So the neighbors should really pay further attention and not only see Afghanistan to be a westernized Afghanistan, to see that to be practical and realistic about the geography of Afghanistan and the impact of Afghanistan, whether it can be a stable country or, God forbid, if it goes through further crises, what kind of impact it can have. And the same thing I think is true for Western world, that if they're not going to be having collective efforts, Afghanistan doesn't need different artists right now, that everyone can define their own interests from a different island. This is the time that everyone can find a common ground to ensure that we are not going to have disaster in this country. Disaster in Afghanistan can have not only disaster in our neighbors and in our region, but certainly to the West and to any part of the world. Because
absolutely.
So
Zahra,
much
we cannot have
crisis.
Another disaster in the region. And of course, Afghanistan and the Afghani people have seen war for too long now, and they deserve to see peace now. Salma, Zahra made some very important points in her analysis now. How she was talking about being a family now, and we have to think about the future, leave the past behind now. Keeping this in mind, she also mentioned about the West, that the West should support Afghanistan now, not to cut its feet. But the West seems like it is interested only in cutting its feet, because we have seen they froze the Afghan assets, which are very vital for the Afghan economy right now in these dire situations to take care of the Afghani people.
Right. Munib, unfortunately, I think these things are a little bit too little too late kind of a situation. If the West really was sincere in securing Afghanistan and Afghan nationals' interest, they should have thought it out prior to Doha. And when they went in to sign the Doha agreement, we had repeated meetings with American government officials, including Lisa Curtis and many others. And one of the aspects that many of Pakistani women, security analysts and parliamentarians tried to tell our American stakeholders and friends were that women and children will become most affected in case there is a faulty agreement. And the very fact that America had, after 9/11, intervened into Afghanistan on the pretext, besides so many other genuine issues that one can cite, or at least they managed to give, one major reason was the plight of women under the Taliban, the previous Taliban government. And they wanted to secure them, they wanted to liberate women from the culture that had permeated at that time. However, they did not do anything much when it came to the Doha agreement, despite the fact that Heart of Asia, the Doha deals, everything, that entire process also had Afghan women parliamentarians, also had women parliamentarians participating, or women officials participating from a cross-section of Afghan political parties and society, and there were a lot of assurances from the Taliban, but unfortunately the situation at this point doesn't seem that promising. When it comes to the finances, restricting the finances will give rise to a lot of humanitarian issues. Education is the least priority when it comes to a conflict situation, so we should not even go there, because education is something which is deeply negotiable under dire circumstances, but health, direct, indirect security of women, vulnerable population groups, as well as young children, youth, all of these stand highly affected and insecure under the current regime. And in case of another series of attacks which are carried out primarily to scare people, will actually enhance not only the sense of panic within the Afghan nationals, they will try and scramble to safe zones. And safe zones, of course, are the countries around Afghanistan that can provide them refuge. And that is going to give rise to, despite the fact that they'll be physically secure in other countries, that is going to give rise to yet another massive humanitarian crisis. The point that Farkhanda was just mentioning, that let's say 1 million people are able to fly to safety. That leaves 29 million people back in Afghanistan, and let's say another 2 million amongst them manage to get security or safety or refuge in neighboring countries. That does not really solve the problem. That makes them stateless people. There are a lot of Afghan parliamentarians, civil society operators who were traveling abroad before 15th of August, who now are actually just sitting in those countries looking forward to a situation where the country is secure for them to either return or let's see what they do in the days ahead. The situation is so fluid, and when the finances have been stopped, what is going to happen at the end of the day when the Afghan kitty runs dry? Are we again looking at a prospect where the international community stops the finances on their whims and fancies without realizing that they are the one who have actually engineered this particular crisis? And the American leadership's comments of saying that, the crisis would have happened had we left later, sooner, or now. So we could not avert a crisis happening in Afghanistan is such a funny thing to say, because you don't leave your partners in lurch after investing or showing them a prospect of security and advancement for the last 20 years, and creating a civil society which actually existed in a bubble. The security that the Afghan civil society, and believe me, those who have been to Afghanistan in those years need to understand this aspect, that many Afghan nationals, young people, people like Farkhanda and so many others, they left their homes, safety, security abroad, came here, lived in Afghanistan, tried to uplift their country, tried to rebuild their country, many a times at their risk. We also know that way back in January, there were 2 Afghan judges, lady judges, who were jurists who were targeted and they were killed. And we had a lot of success stories in Afghanistan. And now what happens to those success stories? We talk about them, but are we going to build anything further on that? You see, the problem here is that even if we talk about an ideal inclusive government, the various stakeholders have their different divergent perspectives and interests when it comes to constructing an inclusive government. Who gets what ministry, who gets how much stakes in this game, the finances, the money that comes out of it. In a post-conflict society, there are a lot of these problems that need to be looked into. And that is not something which is specific to Afghanistan. That is something that happens in every post-conflict society in a country which is extremely resource rich, but the people have not been able to benefit from their own resources. And the fact that we can ideally perceive that the regional actors and the various stakeholders around the region are going to ensure Afghanistan's peace, but that is not going to happen. Pakistan will always remain the flogging horse in this game, because unfortunately this is the nature of the game. But the very fact is the Taliban are a very autonomous actor. Unfortunately, after Afghanistan, if there is any country that stands to suffer from the turmoil in Afghanistan, is Pakistan. If Afghanistan is a stable, secure country, Pakistan benefits. Unfortunately, if Afghanistan is an unstable, insecure, conflict-ridden society, Pakistan stands affected. We can do any border security parametering, everything, but the very fact is that you cannot stop a humanitarian crisis by erecting border security parameters and fences. A humanitarian crisis is a humanitarian crisis, and stopping finances, containing people in a particular place, giving false promises, unfortunately, and having these new photo ops where we see American Marines holding an Afghan baby and cuddling him and kind of like, hugging him to sleep. That's not going to help. They may be good photo opportunities for New York Times or Washington Post, but at the end of the day, there are people in Afghanistan who are scared to death about what is going to happen in the coming days. And say the money runs out, where will they eat? What will they eat? There won't be any food, there won't be any health security. The hospitals are going to run dry of resources and so many other things. So there's a major humanitarian crisis brewing up inside Afghanistan besides this physical crisis, and it is going to have very severe repercussions cross-border for all the countries that neighbor Afghanistan or hold an interest in Afghanistan's stability.
Well, absolutely, Salma, that is very true. And Afghans are the world. When it's going to happen and when are we going to see peace finally? We'll continue the discussion after a short break. Welcome back. Now you're watching Newswire. I am Munib Hamid, and we have with us Farkhanda Zahra Naderi, political. She's a politician, former member of parliament, and we have with us Dr. Salma Malik, and you heard the discussions just before the break. Now, I want to ask both of you ladies this question. Is the US a friend of Afghanistan with the Taliban in power or not? First, let's go to Farkhanda.
We all know that US already signed an agreement with Taliban. So for the future of Afghanistan, US is responsible towards Afghanistan. For 20 years, US have been invested so much.
But the way
of course, US with the West.
But the way they left Afghanistan doesn't seem they are interested in the future. Do they?
I'm just coming to that point because
right.
I just don't want to go into blaming and not, and just be too much, how can I say, detached from reality. I just don't want to say something which is not fair because I am claiming that we all have to be responsible. So I have to start from my own perspective. So US invested, with the leadership of US, West invested so much in Afghanistan for 20 years. And I still believe that, what we achieved so far, it was certainly Afghan struggle. And especially when it comes to women's rights, I know how much Afghan women had to struggle, work hard and suffer to reach where they reached. But at the same time, I know that the fund and the money came from taxpayers of the world. So I cannot ignore that fact, and I have to recognize it. But the way, NATO, with the leadership of US, they did the withdrawal, I said from the first day that it was so irresponsible. So if it was irresponsible, it means now the world, especially US, have more responsibility to accept towards Afghanistan's today and future. If you come to a country and you are working and investing for 20 years and you're calling that country to be your partner, and if you're going to end it up the way you did it, no one in the world should trust you again. So US is in a very big exam, not because of Afghanistan or Afghanistan's future, but because of its own future. And they have to prove that if they want to be a partner and a dignified partner in any part of the world, especially in our region, they've got to prove that they have been responsible towards what they did in Afghanistan. But their responsible withdrawal showed clearly that US was irresponsible. Even at the beginning when I was saying this, some of our Western friends didn't like it, or Western people didn't like it. But now the whole world can see how responsible that withdrawal was. So now, if it wants to continue its engagement and its foreign policy to be respected around the world, it has to show this to its deed in Afghanistan. So the whole world knows about Vietnam, and everyone says to Afghanistan that we repeated history. Yes, we repeated history. And I have to wear that shame as an Afghan. And many of us should respect that. At the same time, let's not forget, US repeated its history as well. What happened to Vietnam? This is another similar case in Afghanistan. So this is the time that US has to show that in the future, they're not going to destroy a country the way Afghanistan has been destroyed. So you can't destroy the achievements of a country. Forget about our 5,000 history. Just let's go to 20 years history that they jointly built with us. to just destroy it within 2 weeks? I mean, how, if you ignore your own investment, how are you going to be a good partner to any part of the world, to others? So for US, it's the time to show and prove it. They either make it or they break it for themselves, not only for us.
Right, Zahra. Now, Salma,
and the responsibility towards Afghanistan is not only taking people out.
Right, Zahra. We have the point now. Salma, what do you think about US being friends with the Taliban 2.0 or the mature Taliban? We haven't seen that really happening. Obviously, Zahra mentioned about responsibility. So do you think the US will be able to maybe perform a more responsible task or attitude towards the Taliban's Afghanistan in the future?
I agree with Zahra, Farkhanda, when she's saying that as a partner, US should have performed better. That's exactly the sentiment that everyone has. At this particular moment, I think in 1+ week that has unfolded, I think the US is also kind of trying to figure out what to do. They did have this plan post Doha that they're going to pull out, and they have to pull out as it has been said by the president as well. And sooner or later this had to happen. But perhaps they were not actually expecting that things could be so swift, sudden, and there could be a blowback. And if they hadn't perceived this is actually a very faulty tactical issue on their part, because for a country that has been harping so much about reintegration and rehabilitation, especially post-Geneva, and that was a program that went wrong, so we would not repeat that mistake. So they should have known that had such a situation to happen all over again, what kind of firewalls, what kind of protective measures they should have undertaken. Having said that, because this is all pretty academic when we say it, what will happen in the future? American administration, if they are leaving Afghanistan, technically exiting Afghanistan, their forces are exiting Afghanistan, they have a lot of interest left in Afghanistan. They have invested in Afghanistan not so much because of their love for the Afghan people. There are no permanent friendships in this world. It's a real political world in which people interact, nation states interact, primarily owing to their national interest. But one also needs to see that the American public had now undergone a genuine fatigue when it came to Iraq or Afghanistan, and the overcommitment of American troops in these areas, and the fact that post 9/11 economy, the war that they had undertaken globally, there's a massive recession that is still persisting in the US. So for all that, they would blame other countries that, because the Americans are engaged there, so that is why this all is happening. Given all of these facts, how is the American administration going to interact with the Taliban in the future also depends on how other great powers interact in Afghanistan. China has major interest in Afghanistan, so does Russia. Both of these countries are playing very cautiously. They haven't said anything to antagonize any of the stakeholders in Afghanistan, and the US will make a comeback, but what nature of comeback that is going to be depends entirely on how it perceives its future interest in Afghanistan. We may not actually think of another troops on the ground situation in Afghanistan by the US. No, that is not going to happen. There was a massive talk about contractors returning to Afghanistan once the regular troops have gone. So they are going to come here, but the nature of contractors, which are hired militia or hired mercenaries, is much different from a regular force and a coalition force that there was in Afghanistan at one time. How are these actors going to interact with Afghan fighting forces or Afghan government is going to be a very interesting and fascinating scenario because that might actually give rise to a lot of strife. And if there's an inclusive government with Taliban in predominance, they may not be very social to the idea or amiable to the idea of having contractors who are trying to run their own way in Afghanistan, trying to do whatever they follow their interest. But the fact is, the Taliban, we must also keep in mind, are people who are extremely, at least this 2.0 generation is extremely savvy when it comes to their political as well as economic interest. And they very much know, and these past 20 years and their interaction with global capitals have made them smarter to the idea as to what Afghanistan really holds for them and how they're going to benefit from the international community, in what sense. So definitely Afghanistan is not going to be the same Afghanistan under Taliban 1.0. It is going to be a different Afghanistan, and one can really hope that a lot of open spaces that we see now become wider. But the fact is that things are going to be restrictive. There is going to be a very different outlook by the Afghan government in future, and one needs to reconcile with that. The American administration, by giving the type of statements that it is doing right now, is not making too many friends in Afghanistan, and they need to play very cautiously because they have exited from Afghanistan. They were the ones who signed a deal with the Afghan Taliban and a separate deal with the Ghani government. So they really need to own up the prospect that they were the ones who legitimized the Taliban as a force to reckon with, plus the fact that they were also the government who had given the control of future Afghan security, the ISIS and American exit from Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban.
And just to add on this, Salma, very quickly, we just have a few minutes now. I want Zahra and your comment on this now. We have seen the US, and it's quite an embarrassing situation that has been developed for the US forces, especially for the Biden administration in the US, about the billions of dollars worth weapons left in Afghanistan. Now, the question is, were those left or were those surrendered? Zahra, you first.
Well, I just want to, since I don't have that much time, I just want to emphasize what I think is important for the country. What US did in Afghanistan, the whole world is evident of that. But we want to see what US will do to wear that responsibility, not only for in this region, but to be answerable to their own taxpayers and to their own people. Let's not forget that at least in US, the democracy and the people's vote and voice matters, and they live in a more advanced democratic country that their citizens are powerful enough to make their rulers accountable. So they must be responsible, and they have to, in the next phase, how they're going to do this, then they have to use all their leverages around the world to ensure that Afghanistan is not going to go through further crisis.
Right,
but at the same time,
Salma,
I just want to add one more point to
yes, you may, please.
Like Russia and China, we want them to play a constructive role for the betterment of Afghanistan, because again, I'm not going to repeat what kind of impact Afghanistan can have, but I think this is the real time that we need joint effort. At least for the security of Afghanistan, there has to be a common ground for everyone to work together. If not for other interests, there are so much diverse views, but for security, there has to be one, and they have to collectively work.
Right, and Zahra, we want the whole world to play a constructive role for the development of Afghanistan. Now, Salma, lastly, just ask a question now about the $1 billion worth weapons in Afghanistan. Were they left or were they surrendered?
I honestly don't have the answer to that, but I would say that whether they were left or they were surrendered, the fact is that they make this scenario all the more difficult and all the more precarious because they're adding fuel to the fire. And aiming to the point Farkhanda has raised, that we need as many responsible international actors to help Afghanistan get back on its feet under these precarious situation than otherwise. Thank you so much, Malik.
Absolutely. We need the world to pay attention to Afghanistan, and the world at large needs to play a constructive role for the development of Afghanistan and for the Afghanistanis to see peace after 40 years of war. I think they deserve this much to see now. It's just not the region, but the whole world needs to think about Afghanistan, and they need to play a very constructive role when it comes to achieving peace in Afghanistan. Now, Farkhanda, Zahra, Naderi, politician from Afghanistan, former member of parliament, thank you very much for joining us on Newswire. And Dr. Salma Malik, professor at the Department and Strategic Studies, thank you, both of you, for joining us on Newswire. And we pray that peace finds Afghanistan. That's all for now.